All right, welcome everybody, and I'm really excited to have been invited tonight because one of the things that I've been really passionate about is I've lived in Dorset for 45 years. I come from the Dorchester, Weymouth and Portland area, and I've been lucky enough through technology to travel around the world and somehow still looking for the job just around the corner that I can go to work and live and have a great work-life balance. So a little bit about me is my background is really from a creative technology point of view. So I'm from the games industry. So how many people here play games? How many are gamers? Fabulous. So how many people would classify themselves as developers? Programmers? That's interesting. Then we get into project managers, finance people. How about some management in terms of CEOs, startups? So how many of you work in a startup? Great. Any enterprise people? And how many people have been in a band? Right. Okay. So I think this is one of the things that I really kind of wanted to get into is one of the key things that we're here to talk about is DevOps, and of course the other is I'm going to talk about my experience with digital transformation. And I think there are two subjects which most people universally, when you talk to them about those subjects, are what are they? You know, they can, if you Google what is DevOps, it is hundreds of thousands of opinions. If you look at digital transformation, what is it? How do you even start defining that? So I think the critical thing that I've noticed is that technology has really collapsed the interface between the consumer and the people producing a product or a service. So in the games industry, people like to think of Electronic Arts I worked for 17 years, and we think of that as a technology industry, where my experience was it was not. It was a retail business. So Electronic Arts, yes, they created a digital product, but that product, in order to be successful, was built on retail principles. So you had to own the distribution, the manufacturing, the retail outlet, the point of sales, and you would have reps that went into every single store in the country and made sure that the product placement was where it should be for the consumer. And of course, it took a long cycle for the consumer to feed back to us about what they thought the product should be next. So I think the critical thing that you hear about businesses now is their acceleration towards getting to know the consumer better. They need to know who you are in order to be able to give you the product that you want. And of course, the cycle is so short now that you are expecting instant feedback. So one example of that might be Tesla, I think, was a good one, where someone tweeted about a function that they didn't think was done well enough. And Elon Musk then got back to them, and the release was then in that week that they were able to get that product update. So when it comes to DevOps, it's really one of those phrases where what camp do you fall in? It's like the Marmite thing. So do you love it or do you hate it? So hands up the people who love DevOps, think this is the future. And are there any haters in there? Ah, great. Okay, no, that's fabulous. So like I've said earlier, when you do a search on Google for what is DevOps, it's mind-boggling the amount. So this is just kind of another opinion, but it's based on what I've observed through my time delivering technology. I'm completely self-taught, so I started off programming games from magazines, and then doing my own QA, and my family would do the QA, then building the technology, the servers, tuning the game client, tuning the actual hardware as well as the software to actually get a product released. So I think the thing I've noticed the most is development on operations used to be on two different time cycles. So development, you write code, fabulous, and you release that code and then we test it, but you need something to test it on, and there are all the resources that are required to run it. So in a game, it would be very much developers release the game in terms of a build, and we would do daily builds. So we go in and we test the game, and there were all these bugs and problems, and then we're always asking them to estimate. One of the ones that was quite often the case would be, how many servers do I need? And they'd be like, oh, I don't know, a million servers. And but my point was, it was like, okay, as a developer, you need to know what the budget is for this game. You need to know what the draw calls are, you need to know what the memory is, what the CPU, the storage, now the network, and all the systems that are going to interface to create that experience. So if you can't tell me what that manifest budget is, how can I extrapolate that out and give you a reasonable forecast? So one of the big changes was really around the last game I worked on was Star Wars: The Old Republic. So we had around about 8,000 servers, and we released from 0 to 75,000 concurrent in around 7 minutes, and to 1 million concurrent inside a week, and then we're hitting around 2 million concurrent. And that's fire, police, ambulance, fraud detection, all that great stuff, and even suicide watch. So from a platform point of view, you're essentially turning on almost an immigration. So don't think of it as a subscription, think of it as a bunch of people who are getting for their subscription almost like a tax. And the role of the company is then to provide all the services that come with that. So we provide the game politic, the narrative, the environment, and then within that, they can experience the world. So in Star Wars, we literally recreated the Star Wars universe, the narrative, the politic, the voiceover, and lots of AI, lots of non-player characters to give that depth of interaction. So how does that relate to enterprises? Well, DevOps was really around after Star Wars. It was I could build those 8,000 servers with a couple of lines of code. So suddenly you're on the same cycle as development. Operations could enable the developers and empower them with code so that they can write the code they need to deploy the resources. And suddenly that meant that it wasn't 90 days, it was as fast as you could release the code, we could test it, and then we were in the same cycle. So that's really, for me, where this DevOps kind of way of working came around. It was literally taking the 90 days out. We could work at the same speed in software development life cycles. As a frustrated programmer, it's woohoo, I get to play with branches and merging and all this stuff, but it's infrastructure code. So when I'm talking about enterprises and digital transformation, these are different operating models. So a startup, digital native company nowadays has a lot of software that is wrapping around their operating model, what they need to do, their sales channel, their marketing, their product, their HR. And it used to be that companies and large enterprises, the barrier to entry was people and processes. So if you're a very large enterprise, 50,000 people, and you can imagine the reach and the processes, then if you want to compete with me, good luck with that. You've got to go out and you've got to do all that, and then I'm going to see you from 5 years away. What we're seeing now is companies that are digital native that can use this and adopt this operating model are able to be disruptive and be in your face within a year. So that's one lever, right? So you then have, well, how do we take advantage as an enterprise of that kind of acceleration? So very much it's, what does the business do? It's around people, processes, and technology, and there's the strategy that it has to go and execute what it is that the customer is engaging with the business on and reduce the time cycle. So very often it's cost that will drive that. So we can do something very quickly to influence the business. And one of the things that come around is, well, okay, we have this technology, we can deploy it very quickly, but where's the value? So as techies, we can get involved in large data lakes, big Hadoop clusters and things like that, and that's great and it's very interesting. And of course there's this phrase that data is the new oil. So I was really interested in what that really meant. So that information, that oil, is useless without the processing that goes with it. So if you think about that oil analogy and we think, well, where's the processing plant? That's where the complexity is. So how do we refine that information and make it a product where not only for the internal business and how it gets that information and how it can act on it. So one of the enterprises I was working with was looking at how was it that they missed out on salted ice cream. So suddenly that was a thing, they didn't know about it, they were too late getting to that, to reacting to that, and they lost a lot of money. So you could see that there was an opportunity lost there. So what we were able to do is bring together a small development team, let them be accountable and responsible for that entire stack, work within that business function almost like a startup, and then deliver capability back to the business so that they could then have that insight back, and then they could act on that insight and start planning what those products are like, engaging with their customers and community, and gain value from that. So that was pretty interesting, going through that and being able to deliver some capability. But it's about digital transformation, and I think this is exactly what we saw earlier. So when we ask companies what is the barrier to adoption, interestingly, it's people and processes. If you have an employee base of 50,000 people, how on earth are you going to take all that and then transform it digitally into an operating model that's optimized, where everyone's able to understand where they're delivering value to the business? And from a DevOps point of view, a lot of the solutions are, hey, well, we do DevOps, that will solve our problem. And the thing I really like about this slide is only 8%, and in the other one, reported that technology was an issue. But when you look at the DevOps periodic table, for example, there are hundreds of choices to make from a technology stack. And the fragmentation that is there means it's pretty interesting that they're still looking at the people and processes. And of course, that's a highly complex piece of work to do. So the other thing I hear a lot about is DevOps is serverless, it's cloud. That's what we should be doing. So we're doing cloud, we're doing DevOps. We're doing digital transformation. And it's interesting how, when you look at this from what a business does, and its accountability and responsibility to the customers, because as we know and we're aware of, it's not your data. So if you're a company and you're collecting customer data, it's not yours. It's the customer's data. You have an obligation to make sure that data is treated appropriately and the right level of governance is around it. So an enterprise has to deal with the fact that they have a lot of people and processes that give that accountability and the audit trail that underpin that. So simply going to serverless is really not going to get them there. And you can then look at, well, DevOps, what will it do? It's a technology accelerator, absolutely. But if you don't understand the complexity of the pieces that you're taking on, how can you deliver the kind of optimization that is going to come out of it? So very much this is about working with companies and enterprises to look at this infrastructure maintenance and security. That doesn't go away. So how do you find the people in the organization that have that knowledge, but they're not coders? How do you find the architects that have that knowledge, but they're not coders? How do you get them to work in an entrepreneurial environment with a small team to transfer that information so we can codify it, and then the business can start working as a code operating model? We then have a predictability, and we have security, and we have all the things that we think that code can deliver. And of course, the way in which it interacts with their internal teams and their internal systems is a hugely complex undertaking to try and take them on that journey. So I think there's three levers I see usually. One is strategic. So, hey, we need to do DevOps because we're dead. If we don't make this transformation, the disruption and the up and coming companies that are already doing this are going to steal our lunch. The second one is then project. So you get project guys going, oh yeah, if we do DevOps, then Agile is DevOps, and then that will solve all the company problems. Then the third lever I usually see is technology. So an IT team will say, if we just had Jenkins, Selenium, and all this stuff, we can do DevOps, and that will save the company. And of course, the reality is, it's all of those things have to be brought together. So from a recruitment point of view, what that usually ends up with very often is a team that's like a poor little motorcycle display team, and the guy on the bottom with all the agile guys and the project guys, and it all comes down to this mythical DevOps guy. So how many times you get a job spec and you look at it and think, geez, that's a whole team. How on earth are we still clinging on to this idea that DevOps is a role? I think it's a natural cycle where we're starting to grapple with what it actually means, and people are working in that way. And of course, we're all feeding back and going, well, that's just not how this is supposed to work. I think it's more like an entrepreneurial approach where you have a startup, accountable, responsible, has all the people from the CEO, CFO, and those people down to unblock the team to achieve the goal that the business has given them. The challenge is, how do you finance that? Businesses have these long budget cycles, whereas startups, it's you go bust or you succeed. The money runs out. So if you're joining a startup, how quickly do you figure out, well, when are we going to run out of money and what are we trying to do? So due diligence comes in and provides the correct benchmarks for, okay, now we've got to focus on audit. Now we've got to be an acquisition target. So we've got to make sure all that stuff's in place. So there's a lot of natural things around a startup that obviously they have to be attentive to, and that cycle, whereas enterprises have a whole different challenge. And of course, the key thing about a DevOps team is, I think, having that principle of co-location. How do you do that? How do you make sure that you've got all the people within that team accountable and responsible and able to unblock and deliver what they need to do? And of course, then you've got the chaos that is a startup. So one of the things I think about is people, technology, and processes. So how many people have looked at DevOps and seen maturity models? So is that something anyone's had a look at and any knowledge of? Right. So maturity models are, we'll come in, we'll measure all the things in all the parts of your business, and then we'll develop this idea of how mature your business is, and then we'll do DevOps to you. And that will solve all your problems, and then we'll take that to the next company and the next company and the next company. I think the challenge with that is the three-body problem. So it's a journey. So how are you starting? Where are you at? What are you trying to do? And what is your appetite? Suddenly you then have, well, people and technology, we can start working with that. People, technology, and processes, as they move through that journey and they go from an immature, various maturity states, that complexity becomes harder to predict. So suddenly you're in this chaos of like a company saying, but we want to know what it's going to be like in 2 years' time. So you kidding me? We're in 3-week cycles. So we have to learn from that, and then at the end of a particular phase, we'll reset and start again. So I think that the team thing is vastly underestimated. If you can keep a team small, the games industry experience that I've had is, a 25-person team will deliver a $30 million return. So that's a size of a team that can work effectively together without necessarily introducing over complexity in organizational structures. And how do we do it? We do it with repeatable processes, code, and technology. And it's a very light touch. Then the games industry went through a cycle of, well, where I think we are with DevOps, with the over focus on tools, which is you would go into a game studio and every single studio would want to build their own engine. And then after a period of time, it's like, well, this is crazy. We need to consolidate that down. And I think we're seeing the same with DevOps tool sets. We want to fossilize into them too early because people are latching onto them, but they're not mature enough yet to deliver all of the scale we need. So if we broke down identity and commerce and took those away and then said as a product team, you don't have to worry about that, but you can concentrate on the community aspect, then all bets are off. You can use what you like because you're not endangering the key pieces of the governance that would put the company at risk. So I think sometimes with DevOps, it's we'll do it fast, get some stuff in, and then the problem with that is you think that's success. And, well, you can write code that will create a business in 5-6 minutes. You can deploy code that will kill your business in 5 or 6 minutes. So grey IT starts to become a problem. So if you rolled that model out and scaled it, now you've got 500 teams running all these pieces. How do you make sure they're all compliant? How do you make sure that code's being written properly? How do you make sure each team is doing that to the level you require? So I think very often it was, well, what was I trying to say with this? Tools are, you wouldn't have an experience where you go into a restaurant, you have a great meal, and then you call the waiter over and you say, what was the cooker that the chef used? Because I'm going to go and buy that cooker, and I'm going to buy that fridge, and I'm going to get this stuff, and I'm going to have that. So it's really about what is the team, what do they need at the right time, what are the kind of tools. There is no right or wrong answer. And very often I see a thing about technical debt. And it's, well, if you're not incurring technical debt, well, you're not innovating. So technical debt should be like an overdraft. You take from it, but you pay it back, and you know what the cost of that is, and you manage it. But it's usually, you should be looking at, is it appropriate for this phase of the business at this time to have that balance? Because the real world is push the product, get it out. And if it's good enough, then that's great. If it's secure, performant enough, and does what we need it to do, then we can refactor it later. So I guess that's the end. What I'd like to know. Based on that, what questions do you guys have? Come on.
How much money did you make on Old Republic?
How much money? An obscene amount of money. So yeah, there's. I think the thing with the Old Republic, it was 3 years in development, no money. So you gotta have a team. When I joined, we took the team with 3 people in Ireland. We took that to about 350 people in 18 months. We had 1,600 people worldwide. I also developed and was working on the operations team, the building of the infrastructure, how you'd support that, PCI compliance, all those great things. But it's like a movie production. That production team works on that project as a team, and once it's finished, they then move on to the next one. But you're thinking about, you put in those hundreds of millions of dollars with no guarantee there'll be a return. So it's a hit-driven business.
Sorry, I'm not a gamer. What's Old Republic?
So the Old Republic is what they call an MMO. So it's based on the Star Wars lore. So the Star Wars films give you a part of that story. Then there is a whole load of lore around that encompasses, before how it got to that point, and then the community develops that story and that politic and that narrative. So it replicates the environment, which is literally planets, towns, the whole politic of the universe, the interactions. Non-player characters will work as agents, they will work as merchants, and they will have accountability and responsibility in the game to actually deal with achieving things and interacting with the politic and the narrative of the game. So it's, like I've said, we have a million concurrent people in that environment and experiencing that. So it's very much a living universe and a persistent state world, which means if you put something down, it stays there. If someone else moves it, it gets moved. The whole thing is a replication of that environment and that world and the interaction and the people and the narrative.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, so one thing is, the games industry is about $112 billion. So it's pretty big. And they have to deal with that scale, right? So you have that, how do you have all these dev teams working on products to generate this revenue, and how do you scale that from a technology point of view? It's a studio model. So you have small teams with accountability and responsibility for their revenue stream. And I think that's one of the key things that I've seen. And of course the Spotify squad model and others are kind of doing that, but the games industry has been doing that for a while. So the consolidation we've seen and how to optimize teams and development and software and delivery is something that I've been interested in taking out of that environment and talking to people in a wider context of what they're doing.
Do you think when there's millions of pounds involved, management are more inclined to get involved and care about DevOps? Or?
So I think that what I've learned from entrepreneurs is they have a capacity to, regardless of resources, drive towards a vision. And so Ray and Greg Zuschek, for example, they were doctors who decided to give up what they were doing and develop games. And they were living off their credit cards. So those people, even when they have millions, are just as attentive to the small stuff. And I think that when I look at how businesses are bootstrapped and how the funding model flows through when you look at the venture capital way, how do you get that money? How do you put together a team? And as a finance guy who's putting that money in, you want to know that the CEO is the kind of guy who's going to be working with the junior programmer to mentor them, who's going to also be hands-on, and they're building the right culture, and that's something they're very attentive to, but you know when it's going to fail. So you really want to test your assumptions very early on, and daily play tests all the time, the build's being made, all the time you're playing it, you as a consumer are interacting with it. And rather than testing and QA being the end of the line, so to speak, in the games industry, they're the most valuable because they're the ones who are interacting with the product as the consumer would. So very often you'll see in the games industry, they're the ones who go on to head up and take very prominent positions in developing the next games. Okay? Well, thank you very much.